The town of Southern Shores was not founded until 1979, but you can trace its history back over 400 years.
In 1584, Sir Walter Raleigh received a charter from Queen Elizabeth I to send 2 small ships to the New World. They were sent to discover, search, find out, and view such remote, heathen, and barbarous lands, countries, and territories to have, hold, occupy, and enjoy.
They arrived on the 4th of July, entering through an inlet above Roanoke Island into what is now the Outer Banks of North Carolina. The very first English flag was planted right here in Southern Shores. Well, depending on who you ask.
The map that John White published in 1590 wasn't 100% clear, but we like to think it's Southern Shores, and at least some of the historians agree with us. Back then, the whole area was called Virginia, after the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. Shortly thereafter, the famous Lost Colony was established on Roanoke Island, just south of Southern Shores. They had a little trouble getting enough to eat and ingratiating themselves with the neighbors, and when England stopped by to check on them, they were gone. Basically, the colony went so badly the English settlers didn't come back to the Outer Banks for another 100 years. That changed in 1663, when King Charles II issued the Carolina Charter, which granted huge pieces of land in North and South Carolina to 8 of his closest restoration buddies. New settlers began to pour into the Southern Shores area, then known as part of Luck Island. Eventually they ditched that name and began to call this area the Currituck Banks, or the North Banks. Back then, they mostly used the land for open livestock grazing. Cattle, horses, sheep, and hogs roamed the beaches and forests.
In 1856, Southern Shores played host to Edmund Ruffin, traveler, editor, and agronomist.
He was here touring the Outer Banks and other parts of North Carolina. He wrote that in the Outer Banks, the sand reef is penetrated by Gingey's Creek, running nearly parallel with the ocean beach and about a mile distant, which makes a secure and deep harbor for vessels. When he got to Southern Shores, he said, "I was surprised at first to find so good and large forest growth on what was evidently soil formed originally by the sand blown by wind. The land is high and the surface very broken and irregular, so as to be compared in shape to a miniature resemblance of a mountainous country. The only trees of considerable size were loblolly pines, the only species seen in all this sandy land."
While Ruffin was waxing poetic about the good and large forest growth, someone must have been listening. In 1917, a huge lumbering operation was undertaken.
Tram roads were built throughout the Duck Woods so that logs could be transported out to Gingey Creek and loaded onto boats. Somewhere between chopping down all the loblolly pines and 250 years of livestock grazing, the vegetation in Southern Shores was starting to get problematically sparse.
In the mid-1930s, the General Assembly banned open livestock grazing on much of the Outer Banks.
Gradually, plant life began to return. At about the same time, more people than ever were coming in. Back then, the only way to get to Southern Shores was either take a ferry from Point Harbor to Kitty Hawk Village, or by driving down the sand trails or wash all the way from Virginia Beach. That changed in 1930 when the Wright Memorial Bridge was completed. Right after that, the state built Virginia Dare Trail, then a 16-foot wide asphalt road. Virginia Dare connected the Currituck Sound Bridge and the Dare County-financed Roanoke Sound Bridge. For the first time, most of the Outer Banks was easily accessible by car, and that meant major changes in Southern Shores.